Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is, I believe, on my 2023 TBR, so I'm making my way through that. It's also a book I checked out from my local library. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. They might have cool books hiding in the various sections of the library. And today's book is all about puberty and religion. I am referring to Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, by Judy Blume, which was published in 1970. Before I get into, discussing Judy Blume, I just want to point out how sometimes when you modernize a book cover, you make it a little goofy and whatnot. And I know this is an attempt to reach out to teenagers, but turning someone's chat with God into a text message, who is texting God? It makes me a little bit angry, but maybe this appeals to teenagers these days. I don't know. But it does seem a little bit corny, more so than anything else. And I'm not even sure it was Judy Blume's choice or not, because it's often the choice of the publishers who are trying to attract those younger readers. But without further ado, let's talk about Judy Blume. For those who don't know, Judy Blume is an American author, often writing a great deal of young adult fiction. She's also written fiction for adults, although it's her catalog of adult fiction is not nearly as long as her catalog of young adult fiction. And her books often focus on feminism, menstruation, puberty, masturbation, and those kinds of ideas. Very radical, to be writing children's books. And a lot of other authors have pointed that out, that she challenges the status quo and is willing to talk about things that are taboo. But at the same time, this also draws a bit of ire from conservatives most of the time, who are like, oh, we don't want our children hearing about these sorts of ideas, even though these are the kind of ideas that young adults are going to be coming into contact with and are very vital for them to hear, so that they don't feel like they're weird or hideous monsters or anything like that. So needless to say, I am a fan of Judy Blume. I've read her Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing series, and I've also read this, and I haven't read much else. And I do think I should do the same thing that I'm doing with Meg Cabot, and just going through her catalog and reading more, just to get a feel for what she's telling teenagers. Because again, it's very important for people to, examine young adult fiction to see what kind of messages we're sending out, whether they be positive or wonky or whatnot. Just good to examine those things. And so without further ado, let's talk about Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. I will read it, do a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, of course, focuses on Margaret and Simon. She is a young 12-year-old girl who is moving to New Jersey with her family. And she, at the start of the story, she's praying to God. She talks to God pretty frequently throughout the story, praying to God to make things go well for her, or to help her find her confidence, or just find her way in difficult situations. When she gets to New Jersey, she meets a new person who in her neighborhood named Nancy. Nancy is a bit outspoken and is very free in talking about puberty and bras and things like that, which Margaret is a bit uncomfortable by, because none of that's happened to her, and she's worried about when it's going to happen, when she's going to finally become a quote-unquote woman. She befriends Nancy, but she also befriends a couple other girls, and they form the PTS club, the Preteen Sensations, where they talk about boys and what goes on at school, and they talk about, they'll let each other know when they're buying bras, and they'll let each other know when they have their first periods, which does happen throughout the story, although it's not as wonderful or magnificent as they lead themselves to believe. And Margaret, in fact, does go and buy a bra, hoping that she'll grow into it. Although when she puts on the bra, it doesn't feel as significant as she thought it would. A common theme throughout throughout the story. And then Margaret, we learn that Margaret's parents are Jewish and Catholic. And they aren't really forcing their religion on Margaret in any sort of way, which goes back to the fact that Margaret's mom, like her parents, did not approve of her marrying a Jewish man. And so they kind of broke it off and stopped talking. And so I think Margaret's mom doesn't want that to happen to Margaret. So they just don't force it on her. But Margaret is having conversations with God, and so she wants to feel closer and connected to him. And for a school project that she's working on, she decides to go to a couple different religious institutions, like a synagogue and a couple different types of churches. But at each of these places, she doesn't really feel closer to God. And she she feels like someone's preaching to her, but she doesn't feel the connectedness. And so she's just wondering when she's going to be able to fit in and be one thing or another. A short while later, she's invited to a schoolmate's party where they kiss in the bathroom. They have a kissing game in the bathroom, and Margaret kisses two boys, and it's a big moment for her, which she feels like once she starts kissing boys on the regular, especially because she's attracted to one of her friend's brothers, she feels that that's going to come in handy or something like that. And Margaret starts noticing that her friends are menstruating. One of her other friends, Gretchen, begins menstruating first in the PTS club, and Nancy even says she did, but we later find out that she lied when Margaret encounters her menstruating for the first time, and Margaret realizes that it's happening to others, but it's not happening to her, and she doesn't want to be the last one. She doesn't want the fear of being left behind to happen to her. And so she begins getting a little bit sadder. We see her sort of lashing out at people throughout the near the end of the story. In one case, she's assigned to a group project with a girl named Laura, and a lot of rumors go about Laura because she's already developed and she's a bit bigger than everyone else in the class. And there's rumors that she might kiss boys or have weird relationships behind the A and P, which Margaret, in a fit of jealousy towards Laura, says that to her. Laura gets really angry and tells her off. And then Margaret follows her to church where she goes to confession. And then Margaret enters confession, but she doesn't really know what to say. And so she just leaves, again, questioning her relationship to God. And then later on in the school year, Margaret's grandparents come to visit her estranged grandparents. And when they get there, they ask her all kinds of questions about her belief and her religion, which her mom and dad are not too happy about. And Margaret ends up exploding at them, saying, "I don't know what I believe. I don't know if I even believe in God. I certainly don't feel his presence." And the grandparents aren't very happy about that. And even when her other grandmother, who she feels closer to, comes, she's like, "Oh, of course you didn't feel connected there. It's because you're a Jewish girl like myself." And Margaret again says that she doesn't feel connected. But then as the story comes to a close, Margaret finally gets her period, and she feels very happy and tells her mother about it. And as the story comes to a close, she once again prays to God, noting how happy she feels and how she feels a little bit more connected to him as a result. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, I know this is a story aimed at children, but boy does Judy Blume present us with quite a bit to think about in Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. The obvious themes that are there that Judy Blume is talking about are growing up and puberty. Margaret is at a very transitory period in her life, going from a preteen to a teenager and experiencing all those things that teenagers deal with. It's just a lot. Being a former teenager myself, I can relate to all these strange feelings and uncertainty that Margaret is going through, even if I myself was not a preteen girl at any point in my life. Puberty and the uncertainty around that is kind of a universal feeling, I would think. But Margaret and her friends seem to be dealing with these normal human bodily changes, going from childhood and all the worries that you have there to being concerned about boys, because Margaret begins feeling the markers of attraction to other schoolmates and begins kissing as well, as you see in this story. So it's clear that the romance is in her future. You also see her talking about bras and menstruation and those types of ideas. And so not only is there like a physical change because Margaret goes through puberty and menstruates, but there's also a mental change in what she's thinking about and how she prioritizes things. You can even see her leaning in towards religion where that wasn't important to her before, now becoming a big thing, which is so often a big thing. Like from a psychological perspective, that those thoughts on like existentialism and God and your place in the universe become more of a thing when you're a teenager, and it becomes hard to really navigate that sort of mindset. You could argue that this is very much so like a study of teenhood, even though it's not too big. It's not like a very in-depth exploration. Like Judy Blume does a little bit, does a good job of presenting those ideas through the lens and through the perspective of Margaret. But in addition to all of that, there's the fear of fitting in, peer pressure and whatnot that you see in teenagers. The fear of being left behind, because Margaret wants to go through puberty. She wants to develop into the image of a traditional woman. Like her and her friends are looking at Playboys, and so for them, like that might be what they're expected to become, the media images of what a woman is. Kind of getting at a little bit at what Meg Cabot was getting at, although this comes before the Princess Diaries series of like what a woman is and like what Mia thinks of herself as a woman. So really good on Meg Cabot on that regard. You see the connections there. The issue at hand being that, like, if you don't fit in, like, especially in puberty-wise, that can produce a lot of, doubt and a lack of self-confidence, of real questions of where you fit in anywhere. But of course, you don't want it to happen too rapidly, as you see in the case of Laura, because Laura is fully developed at this stage in her life in sixth grade. Like she apparently, is menstruating and is fully developed in terms of her boobs, and so she's kind of ostracized for that because it happened too quickly for her, which is unfortunate. I think Judy Blume is making a commentary that for Margaret, like she wants to rush, but when you rush, or when your body is rushed in any sort of way, like there might be that other side of things where you're made fun of for still being very different from everyone else in your class. And then another idea that I didn't expect Judy Blume to talk about, but in retrospect maybe I should have, is the idea of religion. After all, this is called "Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret." It's largely about Margaret trying to figure out like where religion and where God specifically fits into her life. Of course, again, as I mentioned before, she's a teenager. Those ideas are starting to come to the forefront, and she's going to wonder, like, is there a God? Is there a higher power? Is there something that can guide me through life, through this crazy, uncertain period in life where I can't really rely on other people? Like you see her talking to God, and you can argue like, oh, well, what does God mean to Margaret? Like, what is the significance of God for her? Because for many people, it's an authority figure or an overwhelming force for good. But for Margaret, it might just be an inner monologue, someone she can turn to, an external powerful figure that she's always been told about, that might exist out there in the universe that she can rely on, because she might not be able to talk to this with her friends who might make fun of her, or her mother, because this is intensely personal. So for her, religion is a way, and religion and God are a way to better understand herself and try to find a footing in this very uncertain situation that she's dealing with, which is a very powerful bit of writing in this young adult fiction story. Like Judy Blume going out of her way to really talk about big ideas here. What's really interesting is that her parents allow her to make the decision, again, partially based upon like what happened to her parents when they tried to get married and through across religions, how their parents made that difficult for them. And she engages in this school experiment where she's trying to figure out like where religion fits in her life, which I think is fascinating. Especially because that's what I did growing up. Like I didn't really have an understanding of what God was, and nobody ever tried to explain it living in a small town. I think it was just a given that there has to be a God or something like that. And so that's why when I went to college, I became an atheist, because I never felt that higher power influence. But for Margaret, it seems to be a bit different, although she's certainly having quite the journey, because the school experiment isn't proving to be helpful to her. And when her grandparents try to force religion upon her and say, you have to believe this way, this is how God is, that doesn't make sense to Margaret, because that's not how God is to her. Like that, like this powerful force for good, or this beloved Catholic system or whatnot, like it hasn't helped her or given her the answers that she's looking for, especially as it relates to her own body. And she ends up telling her teacher that when she gets through with her experiment. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "I have not really enjoyed my religious experiments very much, and I don't think I'll make up my mind one way or the other for a long time. I don't think a person can decide to be a certain religion just like that. It's like having to choose your own name. You think about it a long time, and then you keep changing your mind. If I should ever have children, I will tell them what religion they are so they can start learning about it at an early age. 12 is very late to learn." Which is a very interesting quote, getting at the fact that it's really hard for her to sort of pick a religion, given that there's so many, and that one of those religions might not be as appropriate for her as, say, another in terms of the relationship to God, especially given that she seems to have her own personal relationship with God, and none of the religions really have that aspect of it. But another interesting thing is how she's saying, like, maybe it's just best if I tell my child, oh, you're Catholic, oh, you're Christian, oh, you're Jewish, because then they won't have to make that choice, and their connection to God won't cause them this strife as they're going through a very tumultuous period in their life. And you really see at the end of the story how it highlights her journey, because once, like, she stops praying or talking to God, but once she has this moment of puberty, this moment of menstruation, she's able to connect to God again, and she's able to be like, oh, thank you for helping me. You see that the connection there is based on her confidence and based on the path that's going to help her forward in this uncertain time. Very deep, very complex, that I wasn't really expecting in this book. I also like how this ending kind of makes room for further experiences. Like, this is just one moment in Margaret's life, and she's going to go through many other moments related to boys and puberty and family concerns and whatnot, and just a lot of different unusual experiences being a teenager and dealing with all of that. And the story kind of shows that, her relationship to God and her own confidence and her own fears might get the better of her. So she might go through similar situations and have to deal with or have to rely on her experience to get it through. So a very fascinating sort of ending to this story that I think allows for, more. I would love to see more of Margaret's story. Unfortunately, Judy Blume does not, elaborate on this in any sort of way, which is fine. I think it's good to just leave this where it is sometimes. And then the other thing I want to talk about is this book being banned. It is one of those banned books that have been out there, frequently banned ever since the 1980s. Judy Blume noted that in the 70s, not really banned too much, but once the 80s hit and Reagan got elected, she saw it more and more being banned throughout the United States. But you have to ask, why is it being banned? Like, why would someone want to ban a book like this? And one of the answers seems to be the frank discussion of menstruation and puberty, and how some people are like, oh, this goes against my religion, or I don't want my children reading about this. But the question is, why wouldn't you want your child to read about this unless you were trying to be very controlling and not let them know about their own body? Because talking about menstruation is a very personal thing, but children all over the world are menstruating. Children all over the world are dealing with these exact feelings that Margaret Simon is feeling. And Judy Blume, I think, captures it very well, because she might be writing about her own experience. And so why would you want to forego that for someone so young, unless you were trying to be more controlling? Like, if you say it's against your religion, if it's against your religion for children and for people in general to know as little about their bodies as possible, then your religion is garbage, I'm sorry to say. And so, I don't feel there's justification in its ban. There's rarely ever justification in banning a book, but especially here. And I do think that another aspect of this book, the reason why it's banned, is for its frank discussion of religion and how maybe sometimes you're going to lose your way, and that religion might not always be the answer for somebody. It might be family or friends or a support system. And sometimes you're not going to find your answers through God. And Lord knows conservatives absolutely hate hearing that. So I feel like that's partially why it's banned. It does throw a wrench into things. But I think that's why it makes this book so good, and that it's willing to ask those kind of questions. It might not be, a complete takedown of religion or anything like that, but it is asking important questions and portraying preteen and teenagerhood as it actually is, a very confusing place where you're questioning everything and trying to find your way. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. A really solid book. Certainly not earth-shattering or anything like that, as I feel there have been other books with similar ideas, but still very valuable in the overall canon of young adult fiction and in terms of what we're trying to tell children, the messages that we're passing on. And I feel like it's a very responsible book in that regard, and that it's treating, young adults as actual human beings rather than just saying, oh, you have to believe this or you have to believe that. It's allowing them to ask questions and being like, hey, this difficult time that you're in, you're not alone. Other people have experienced this before. And I think that's the best type of young adult fiction that can really come out there. So really solid read. I definitely recommend that you read it, or perhaps tell your young adult friends to go read it, because it's clearly for everyone, even if you're no longer a teenager like me and was never a woman or a young girl like me. You can still understand the feelings and thoughts that young Margaret is going through in this story. If you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about this great book. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, or this author if they don't already know, or just, talking about other videos and books that I do on this channel. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and New Jersey-like travels. Farewell.